center of gravity of the U.S. border and immigration crisis that enabled no fewer than 14 million illegal aliens to enter the United States in just 4 years is weaponized migration. Venezuela is a proxy of China, Russia, and Iran. They all understand that mass migration can be employed as a weapon of asymmetric warfare to erode national borders, steal sovereignty, and eventually have the United States collapse from within.
President Trump has made it clear, coming around the gate is public safety threats and national security threats, and we have plenty of them to find. They will be arrested, they'll be detained, and they'll be removed.
Welcome to Capitol Hill. We have a special video for you today. We're here in front of the Rayburn House Office building where I'll be speaking shortly about a topic that's very important to the center, part of the research that we've done, specifically that I've done over the last 7 years. And I'll have the privilege and the opportunity to present our research about weaponized migration to the House Oversight Committee on Government Reform, particularly their Subcommittee on Federal Law Enforcement, for a congressional hearing about greater cooperation between federal, state, and local authorities on the big challenge of fighting against criminal illegal aliens and the transnational criminal organizations that are behind them. Chairman Clay Higgins from Louisiana will be chairing the hearing. We'll have the opportunity to engage the subcommittee members on this issue, and this is actually the first time that I've presented these research findings in a public setting. I presented a lot of it through briefings, presented some of it through media interviews, but snippets. This is the first time through both the written testimony and my oral statement that I'll be presenting kind of the comprehensive look. And the bottom line up front for everyone that's going to be watching, and I do recommend that you watch the hearing, the whole entire hearing, but if you just watch my remarks, is that what we've been experiencing for the last 4 years under the Biden administration has not been root causes of mass migration. So as mass migration has happened, immigration has been a kind of an issue throughout many years. Root causes of economic instability, high levels of insecurity, or even natural disasters are kind of routine to some level in the Western Hemisphere and in the world. But the last 4 years have been different. What we've seen is state and non-state actors catalyzing, manipulating, and or inducing mass migration as a weapon of asymmetric warfare to achieve political and geopolitical objectives. And that's going to be the focus of my testimony. So I invite you to please, it's a very important hearing. I invite you to please watch the testimony. We're going to have parts of it on this video, my opening statement, but watch the whole testimony, read the written testimony, and please share it with all your colleagues, because I think this is probably one of the greatest national security crises of our lifetime. President Trump is taking the fight to the cartels and making immigration and border security a top priority for his administration, and we all need to support that as Americans. We all need to support that mission because it's essential to make America safe again.
Mr. Humire, you recognized for 5 minutes for your statement, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Higgins, Ranking Member Lee, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your leadership on this issue, for holding this hearing, and for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is Joseph Humire, and I'm a national security scholar who has spent the past 7 years studying a phenomenon known as weaponized migration. For some, this may be considered a conspiracy theory or perhaps a bit too alarmist. But after the past 4 years and seeing an unprecedented number of illegal aliens entering the United States, then seeing the skyrocketing rates of fentanyl-related deaths, more than 100,000 Americans poisoned each year, and then you have the emergence of new and hyper-powered gangs like Venezuela's Tren de Aragua, taking over entire apartment complexes and tragically carrying out the rape and murder of innocent Americans like Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray, we all realize that something more nefarious is happening inside our nation. The United States is facing the worst border and immigration crisis in its history. Since 2021, our border authorities have encountered 11 million illegal aliens and additional 2.2 million gotaways. At another 1.5 million migrants who arrived in America through flawed immigration and humanitarian parole programs, and usually have 14 million illegal aliens in America in just 4 years. That is larger than the population of 45 U.S. states, or the equivalent of adding another state the size of Pennsylvania to the Union, or, Chairman, 3 Louisianas. Now, Mr. Chairman, as much as we would all love to have more constituents like those from the Great Bayou State in this country, unfortunately, the sad reality is most of these illegal aliens are not assimilating to America. And in some cases, even worse, some of them are tied to the most notorious gangs, cartels, criminal organizations, and terrorist groups in the world. If only 0.5%, 0.5% of this emerging illegal alien population in America is tied to or affiliated with criminal and terrorist organizations, then we are facing a crime terror contingent inside the United States that is the size of the U.S. Army and Marine Corps combined. That is a national security emergency. If that's not a national security emergency, I don't know what is. Now let me get back to weaponized migration. I began this research in October 2018 when thousands of mostly Central Americans crashed the U.S. southwest border in the span of a few weeks. I was actually in Guatemala at the time. For a different reason, I was there training some of our partner militaries on counterterrorism and counter-transnational organized crime, when I got a call from a friend who was a senior Guatemalan national security official and asked for my help. So to give you the bottom line up front, what I discovered back then in Guatemala is that the Central American caravans were planned, financed, organized, and steered by state and non-state actors to cause chaos in Guatemala, Mexico, and eventually the United States. How do I know this? I know this because I embedded with the Central American caravans and interviewed hundreds of migrants, but more importantly, saw firsthand who was behind this. It was a series of politicized NGOs from Honduras who were receiving money from U.S. and European charities, but more importantly, were getting guidance and direction from an anti-American adversarial nation state. That state is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, who worked with the Honduran NGO known as Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which is Spanish for People Without Borders, who then worked with a series of NGOs and charities inside America, notably in California and Chicago, to create the Central American caravans. Now, this begs the question, why would the Venezuelan government care about illegal immigration? The answer is because Venezuela is a proxy of China, Russia, and Iran. They all understand that mass migration can be employed as a weapon of asymmetric warfare to erode national borders, steal sovereignty, and eventually have the United States collapse from within. Remember, China's whole warfare strategy is based on submission, to have America give up without fighting. Far from a problem of root causes derived from socioeconomic hardship, natural disasters, or high levels of insecurity, which is abundant in all parts of the world, the center of gravity of the U.S. border and immigration crisis that enabled no fewer than 14 million illegal aliens to enter the United States in just 4 years is weaponized migration, an academic concept that has empirical evidence and an abundance of political science literature behind it. Weaponized migration is when state and non-state actors catalyze, manipulate, and/or induce mass migration to achieve political and geopolitical objectives. Weaponized migration suggests that criminal illegal aliens inside the United States do not merely arrive here by accident, they were sent here by America's enemies and adversaries. In my written testimony, I include this map of our country. It's what I call a migrant invasion map because it shows the major hubs of where criminal organizations are spreading throughout America, moving towards sanctuary cities, and combined with land purchases by the Chinese Communist Party, are all here to steal the sovereignty of our country. This is a national security crisis, perhaps the greatest in our lifetime. So again, I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for holding this important hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
That ties in, Mr. Humire, to what you brought up regarding weaponized migration. It occurs to me, I'd like you to address this. We have millions of illegals coming into our country, came into our country over the last 4 years, and wave after wave. Policy was always known amongst law enforcement that policy caused that and policy could quickly fix it. We've proven that that's true since January the 20th. But these guys are already here. What have they done to plug into the criminal networks and the cartel networks across the country that our sovereign states and our communities across the country are now having to deal with? Please go into that.
Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, there's a concept that was used in the executive order that President Trump signed designating cartels as terrorist organizations. It's a concept called convergence. And what convergence is when you get terrorist organizations, criminal organizations, an array of illicit actors converging together under logistics. What we're seeing today is logistical networks be erected all throughout the United States as service providers. I'll give you an example. If you're an accountant for a major Mexican cartel, you're a good candidate to be an accountant for ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, that's also operating inside the United States. What this does is it empowers illicit economies and allows those illicit economies to grow and overtake counties, overtake states, and eventually overtake the country. So we're seeing a convergence of criminals, terrorists, and all kinds of illicit actors coming together who may not agree, who may fight on turf battles, but fundamentally want the country to become illicit. And
so the criminal networks that had already existed in our cities and sovereign states across the country, how were they battling for their territory? Why are we seeing an expansion of violent crimes and serious property crimes pushed into parts of our communities that had not historically seen that crime because of the expansion of turf, just the numbers of criminal operators battling for turf? How is that happening across the country?
No, that's absolutely the case. I think you're seeing territorial control and territorial capture. That's fundamental to transnational organized crime. Territory is what they're going after. They want to capture territory, take it away from the state, and impose their own kind of criminal governance. But what we're seeing is that put on steroids, because when you add the state element, nation states now using these transnational criminal organizations, you're seeing an element of ability to put these criminal organizations into overdrive. I'll give you one example, Venezuela's Tren de Aragua. Just in the last year, we've seen it expand from 4 states to over 23 states inside the United States. That doesn't happen on its own. That happens because there's a government back in Venezuela that's providing guidance, direction, and resources to be able to expand throughout the country. And that Tren de Aragua is doing exactly what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, taking over a place that never saw this kind of violent crime before.
More on the sweeping immigration enforcement blitz and Tren de Aragua specifically. Let's bring in Joseph Humire, the executive director at Secure Free Society. You've also written a big report about Tren de Aragua published on heritage.org, the Heritage Foundation. Here's what you said in part, quote, with a documented presence in no fewer than 20 U.S. states, the TDA is terrorizing urban and suburban communities throughout America. For the Venezuelan regime, that's the Maduro regime, the TDA is a tool of asymmetric warfare to destabilize countries while maintaining plausible deniability. So you're saying that this isn't just a bunch of people who are out there engaging in criminal activity. They're doing it at the behest of the Maduro regime to try to destabilize the U.S.
Absolutely, John. And what you're seeing today, not just with TDA, but with all the cartels, is they're not working like cartels anymore. They're working like weapons of warfare, like soldiers on a battlefield to invade territory, capture territory, steal the sovereignty of countries all throughout the Western Hemisphere. So TDA is the latest one that we've seen, but we also see the Mexican cartel. We also see MS-13. And what President Trump did with his executive order of designating the cartels and other TCOs as foreign terrorist organizations is he brought counter-transnational organized crime to the 21st century. For the longest time, fighting terrorism was a top priority of the United States. But fighting these cartels has to be a top priority because they work with terrorists. And in that order, he mentions asymmetric warfare, he mentions crime, terror, convergence, and he mentions complex adaptive systems. These were concepts that were once only discussed within the intelligence community and the academic world. Now they're at the front of the executive power, and I think we're going to use all the elements of national power to go after them. Venezuela is basically infiltrating the United States through its TDA members, and they're spreading. There's no way a gang goes from like a couple states in 1 year, and within a couple years goes to about 23 states in a matter of months. That's not normal. It took the MS-13 decades to do that. So this is something that's been put on steroids by a specific governments that are basically weaponized migration to bring down the United States. And I think now we have a night and day difference because now Tom Homan and others, President Trump, are taking the fight to these cartels, and they're doing it in a very smart way.
How do you believe that the Biden administration's policies empowered terrorists and these terrorist organizations like Tren de Aragua to commit violent crimes against American citizens, especially in places like Colorado and Aurora?
The Biden administration's immigration and border policies provided a magnet for all kinds of criminals and terrorists to basically say the border's open, we're going to move in, and that empowered the enemies and adversaries of the United States, including nation states, to then steer those migrants to be able to come into our country. Ms. Congressman, you mentioned the Tren de Aragua. The Tren de Aragua is uniquely a phenomenon of the Biden administration. It did not exist inside the United States prior to 2021. In fact, most of the Venezuelan migration that was leaving that country since 2014 fled south, through South America. But because the Venezuelan government was able to establish both a land bridge through the Darien Gap, a once uncrossable border between Panama and Colombia, and an air bridge into Mexico, they timed that because they knew that President Biden was going to open the border. Now we have Tren de Aragua in 23 states, including your state of Colorado, and they've captured, killed, and raped all kinds of Americans throughout the country. Many countries in Latin America, especially Venezuela, have emptied their prisons and sent their criminals across our southern border. In the case of the Tren de Aragua, they literally were born in a prison, in the Tocorón prison in Maracay, Aragua, Venezuela, the state of Aragua. And in that Venezuela Maduro regime, the same regime that just carried out the biggest electoral fraud in the history of Latin America, shut down that prison last September. And where do you think those criminals went? They went straight to our southern border.
Amen.
Sure did.
My first question will go to you, Mr. Humire. Can you discuss how the cartels have been able to build stronger illicit networks within the United States?
Essentially, the cartels have been utilizing all kinds of revenue streams. It started with cocaine, it's moved to synthetics, it's now into human smuggling, human trafficking, and there's a range of illicit enterprises that the cartels are taking over. They're not just operating in Mexico, they're operating all throughout the Western Hemisphere, in fact, the world. They're appearing in Europe, they're appearing in Canada, and what they're doing is they're creating an enterprise that's upwards of cocaine itself, $170 billion annually a year.
Is it radical to open up your border? Is it extreme to open up your border? Is it cruelty is the point when you open up your border and that causes something like 60% of every female coming across the border to be raped, and no matter what the age is, and about 35% of every male coming across to be raped? Does that sound like a humane policy?
Absolutely not. If you want to dismantle your democracy, you have to dismantle the sovereignty. A border protects the sovereignty of your country. The first step to dismantling democracy is to erode a sovereign border. And in fact, migrants are oftentimes the victims of all this. They're the ones that get killed, raped, trafficked. And so the best form of migrant care is actually border security.